Okay, well, I'll crack off into it. So, welcome everybody. It's arrived, and there'll be a few more trickle in, no doubt. Mostly familiar names, but there's a couple there that I don't recognise. So, my name's Sam Lang. I manage the Quorum Sense Extension project, which is why I'm here. And the topic for this webinar, just as a reminder, is around managing winter feed and nutrition. So, this is a pasture focused or pastoral farming focused webinar, and we'll be kicking off some arable focused ones once the arable guys settle down a bit throughout winter. So this is the second one. We ran a kind of broader one about 6 weeks ago, of which Mark was a panelist, and we also had Hamish Belsky, Jules Matthews, and Maya Smith. So if anyone wants to go back and have a look at the webinar recording or the audio, which we've cut out, that's on the Quorum Sense website or on our YouTube channel. And so tonight, thank you very much, Mark, for coming back on for a second time in a row, and also Rachel and Kenneth Short from up in Taranaki, and Dean Martin from up in Hawke's Bay. Now, most of you should have hopefully received an email with a Google Drive link that would have taken you to a PDF that has the background information on each of the panelists. So sort of just for the sake of time, we're just playing around with using this format, so you can basically just have a quick read of that and you'll get a feel for the context of each of the panelists on here, and that saves us sort of 5-10 minutes introducing them and allows us just to get stuck straight into it. So if anyone hasn't got a copy of that, I've just put it into the chat, so hopefully you can click on that Google Drive link and that will bring it up for you. So yeah, format for today, for those of you that were here last time, fairly similar. We're just going to run through a bit of an overview. I've sent the panelists a few questions in advance, and this time I'm just going to sort of loosely interview them, about 10 minutes each, and we'll have time for a couple of questions of each one, and then yeah, hopefully we'll move into a bit more of an open discussion like we did last time. And yeah, if we get the opportunity, there's lots of experience and stuff in the audience as well as on the panel. So if we get a chance, we'll look at maybe bringing a few people in, and especially if there's certain topics where we know people have got experiences to share that are going to benefit everyone else. For anyone, I imagine most people are getting pretty familiar with this, but we'll use the Q&A function down the bottom. So if you get down to the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box there, and if you click on that, you can type in your questions. Feel free to type them in as we go, and then I'll do my best to make my way through those. And if you really like a question, and there's a lot of them, you can click the thumbs up, and that'll bring it to the top of the list, and hopefully I won't miss it. Other thing to mention is these webinars go online, so they'll be up on the website and the YouTube channel, both as a video and an audio we're having a play with, so that you can actually just listen to them as podcasts, since we're not sharing any presentations. So just looking at building up a bit of library of things. As we know, the podcasts get pretty good reach, and yeah, I think that's all the formalities. But if anyone's got any particular concerns with themselves going onto the internet, just let me know and we can cut little bits out or anything like that. But it hasn't been an issue so far. Yeah, so just to recap the last webinar in terms of relevance to this one, we did touch a bit on things like winter grazing, cropping, and also bale grazing. And we had Hamish Belsky and Maya Smith and Jules Matthews touching a bit on their strategies there. But when I put the call out for suggested topics, effectively people wanted to dive a bit deeper into that wintering system, which makes sense considering the time of year and we were heading into. So thanks to Dylan and Mark for your feedback there. And if anyone wants to go back and recap on any of that, then there are some if you go to the YouTube one, there's some kind of timestamps with the questions, and you can just dive into specifics rather than having to watch the whole thing. And yeah, so without any more delay, I think we'll crack into it. And Mark's volunteered to kick us off, so thanks very much, Mark. And Yeah, so first question is really a bit of an overview and just wanting to know how your wintering systems changed over time. And for you, I think that's probably the last 4 or 5 years since you started making some pretty serious changes. So can you just talk us through that, please?
Okay, thanks everyone for coming along today. It's good to be here again. So yeah, I guess I just want to touch back on our purpose, which is connection, challenge, and creativity. We very much get excited about, well, I guess the creativity was doing something different and trying a new type of wintering system. And yeah, I guess the connection was sort of connecting this ecosystem, the whole systems approach up, and touching on challenge. I mean, we like challenge, and creativity was around trying new methods to improve outcomes. So anyway, yeah, I guess there was a few pressure points. One was we saw that we were losing sediment in the current wintering system, and that was when we were based on monoculture cropping kale or fodder beet. So yeah, we were causing damage there, and we knew that. And yeah, the Waira stream that we boundary has had declining macroinvertebrates and yeah, general waterway health for the last sort of 17 years of ORC records. And the sediment in there now is quite visual. So really we started moving away from monoculture winter crops 5 years ago, and we started initially by just planting another species like kale with our fodder beet. And then I started to learn more about regenerative principles and really started to focus in on the no bare soil policy, or the not policy but principle. And yeah, then we started planting more diverse crops. So we started to put beans, oats, and some type of ground cover in there that was potentially going to stay there after winter. And through that transition, we started direct drilling as well, and we actually weren't getting the yields that we were. And we had a very dry summer one year, and I just got poor yields with my multi-species crops, and that actually forced me into trying bale grazing. So that winter we wintered all the cows on bale grazing for 1 month, and it worked so well we progressively just transitioned out of those multi-species winter crops and towards bale grazing. And this will be our 3rd year on bale grazing, and yeah, we're under no illusion that we're still importing. We're stealing from someone else's natural capital to build our own through bale grazing. But that's our best option at the moment to keep the soil covered as we transition towards potentially stockpiled grass in the future. Yeah.
So what are the, if we can dive into that a little bit deeper for you around the pros and cons of winter cropping versus the bale grazing, and maybe the specific challenges or benefits you experienced with those 2 different techniques?
Yeah, okay. So I guess it was just really about having a cleaner environment for our cows, and the people that were working with the animals through that generally wet, muddy period of winter. So as we started to learn more about whole systems, we could see that we could eliminate dry cow therapy as well by moving towards this all pasture wintering. So we're slowly eliminating that huge cost out of the system as well, with the cows now drying off to nice clean pasture. And also there was beforehand we were still feeding plenty of supplement, but just on the crops. So it was nice just to move away from that. But I guess the transitioning of the gut, moving on to the bale grazing, we weren't then having to do that transition period. So yeah, that was a bonus. But yeah, it was mainly just the environmental cost, the hidden environmental cost, really, that drove us down this path. Yeah.
Awesome, cheers. Then what about, I suppose again, to dive into specifics a bit further, can you talk us through effectively when you start planning for setting up for bale grazing and what you're trying to achieve in terms of, like when you're starting to take paddocks out of your autumn rotation to leave, to set them up for winter, etc., and how much of your platform and how you kind of calculate feed, and then I'll stop there and I'll ask one more.
So we're starting to move more of the bale grazing onto the dairy platform now. Initially it was on the adjacent support block. So yeah, we're mixing it up a little bit now onto the platform, where this year we decided to take the paddocks out a month earlier because we were having such a good season, and then the rain turned off and it kind of turned the opposite. But it's now it feels like we're integrating the wintering system into like a milking model rather than having it separate. So come springtime, late October, we've already got those paddocks back in the grazing round, when quite often we need them to extend our grazing round out. So managing around that, we're using around 60 hectares for wintering 600 cows on the bale grazing, and they are currently using around 4 bales of hay per cow, which is actually very similar cost to the fodder beet model, with having your paddock out of the system for approximately 14 months by the time you plough it and regrass and graze it. So the cost is very similar, but we have yet to calculate the ongoing benefits with the extra water holding capacity that the litter is leaving there. Those spots are certainly a lot greener through this period we're having this dry spell. So do you want, I could speak a little bit more about the area, if you like.
Yeah, I guess the goal here is to help everyone understand how you do what you do and what results you get, so they can look at it. So if you've got more, then please crack into it.
Yeah, cool. So at the moment we are, so I guess we'll touch back on gaining those paddocks back in the milk in October. So we're gaining them back when we have that peak milk flow, or nearly at that peak milk flow, and we're taking those paddocks out when we're at our, we're producing half of what we were then. So there is a saving we're having there as well with milk flow. But also it was really about just being all pasture and helping get our grazing round out longer, to get our recovery periods longer, and that's where we're starting to see these improvements in the soil health and cow health from grazing slightly taller pasture, and we're starting to get the stock density. That's letting us get the stock density up, and helping us lay down a lot of that litter through that spring flush. So that's kind of creating this fertilizer effect, I guess. Yeah, so yeah, setting up the bales, we generally, because we're buying in a lot of the hay for around probably average $65 a bale. Yeah, we generally just take it, the truck arrives, so I'll just, it's this time of year, basically, January to now, and we either store it under trees or in the paddock, down the side of the paddock, and just fence it off and continue grazing that paddock up until we take that paddock out of the ground, which is normally later February, March. And then we just let that feed grow up. And when the truck arrives, we start placing those bales out. I mean, it's a huge labour sort of saving if we can get those bales delivered right on the spot and just unload them. And it's really simple. Like I'll target one paddock, which will be sort of like a month, at least a month's worth of grazing for a mob of 100 cows. And I'll just, the truck will come on there, we'll unload, and we just measure the paddock break sizes, or the 3-day breaks. So we set the bales up in 3-day breaks, and I measure that all out just with a measuring wheel and some standards, and that gives me a guide where to place them. And yeah, we're feeding around 12 bales per 3-day break. So 12 bales per 3-day break.
For 100 cows.
For 100 cows, I'm still working on around 300 kgs dry matter per bale. And really the grass, I'd love the grass to be longer, but sometimes it's anywhere between 2,500 cover and 4,500 cover. So generally I always target those paddocks, graze the paddocks first with the longer cover. But yeah, it's really, we're still trying to work the system out. Like, we would obviously like to go to stockpile feed, but we would then have to reduce cow numbers, and we've still got debt to pay, so we need that milk flow coming in. So that's why we're still buying in hay.
Awesome. So devil's advocate question. I think you had a pretty dry winter last year, but what happens if you get an absolute shockingly wet season? What's the, I don't know, have you had one of those? And if you haven't, what's the plan when you do?
We haven't had it too bad. We had a period last year where we had 70 mils of rain over 2 days, and we try to factor in some extra days there for 2-day shifts, so we move them a little bit faster. Generally, when that rain's coming through, there's potentially snow with it, so it's colder. They eat the hay quicker. So yeah, we factor in a few extra breaks there for adverse weather days. Bad days don't last long, so yeah, they pass over pretty quick. And we do have some backup. We've got a winter pad that we bark chip winter pad, drained pad to ponds, and it has sawdust over the top protecting the bark chip. The bark chip lasts maybe 4 or 5 years, and we replenish the sawdust on top, and those pads can hold maybe 400 cows. So that's another option, because I generally run my heifers on that pad, feeding them a little bit of silage through winter. This year I have my heifers out on bale grazing for at least a month, and then move them to the pads. And all that pad waste or material we compost now. So yeah, the pads are quite expensive. I mean, they're probably more like $25, a little bit more, maybe $27 a week by the time you factor in like the sawdust, the spreading of effluent, and the scraping and stuff. So yeah, I mean, the sawdust used to be free, but yeah, it's not anymore. So yeah, the bale grazing is certainly a cheaper option for us. And I guess another thing I should touch on is with that increased soil health we're seeing from that the litter that's left behind, maybe 10% of each bale, maybe maximum 15%. The leftover litter that's creating this extra soil health effect we're seeing within, say, 12 to 24 months. We're seeing the infiltration rates in those areas just blitz the non-bale areas. So we did some infiltration tests in the bale spots, and the water was just 2 inches of water was disappearing in 2 minutes, whereas on the non-bale spots the water was still there 25 minutes later. So it's created this like soil health effect. So as we do more of this, increase soil health, when we do get those large rainfall events, we kind of don't notice it like we used to. The ground absorbs it rather than hugs up. And then it's having that opposite effect in summer as well. Those areas are infiltrating and holding more water, and they're growing more grass. So yeah, the area that we're really targeting for bale grazing was cereal cropping, and it was, yeah, it's been hammered. And yeah, most of the residue is always burnt off that heavy tillage, so the soil just needs long recoveries with pasture, high stock density grazing, and we're also doing the bale grazing on it to try and accelerate the repair on that ground. Yeah.
Awesome. So hey, thanks, Mark. We'll stop there because I've got another 10 questions I could follow up with, but we'll hopefully just to the audience, just remember to use that Q&A. Seeing as none of you have got into that yet, we'll just crack on to Rachel and Kenneth, and but no doubt there'll be a bunch that will come in towards the end, and we'll keep diving into that. Now, hopefully everyone's got that that little overview open, but just in case you don't, Rachel and Kenneth Short dairy farming in coastal Taranaki in a self-contained system up there, and if you want any more information on them, just open up that PDF there and you can read while they're speaking. But thanks, Rachel and Kenneth, for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome.
Exciting if you feel like total newbies, but hopefully we can add a little bit of value or something.
Yeah, well, I think well, yeah, I know the feeling the first time I hosted one of these, that was even worse. But we're all pretty casual here, I think. Yeah, so assuming that everyone's having a flick through your little background there, do you mind sort of talking us through, sort of similar to Mark, where your wintering system started off a few years ago, and kind of where it's come from and where it's moving to?
Yeah, so we've always been, even going down we're quite new to the regenerative journey, but we've always been a fully self-contained all grass system. All our young stock are on farm, and we're really about making the most of the resources that we've got. We've actually got 2 farms. They're in equity partnership with my parents. So one's 10 minutes down the road, and we started an organic conversion on that farm in 2015. And then sort of 10 months into that, we were quite enjoying what we were doing. So we started it at our place. And that's a 3-year conversion. And then rolling off the end of that, all of a sudden we were certified, and we're looking for the next steps, and looking at putting more diversity and stuff into our pastures. And that's where we sort of ended up going along to a few regen workshops, and met Jules Matthews along the way. I see she's watching us tonight. Jules was due to come on our farm on the first day of lockdown last year, but obviously that didn't happen due to the lockdown. That sort of got put off for a few weeks. So we finally got her on farm in May, and have made quite a few changes sort of over the last 12 months. But I think we're already starting to make some changes prior to that as well. So we milk, peak milk 400 cows, but up to 3 years ago, we were peak milking sort of that 440, 450. So we dropped 40 cows out of our system to sort of stop trying to put so much pressure on. And we also came from a system, you know, typical Dairy NZ, ryegrass and clovers, and eat your paddocks out like you mowed them. What I leave in paddocks these days, back when we were twice a day milking, the cows would have got sent back in the afternoon to clean it up, so to speak. So coming into winter grazing, like I guess a big thing for us, like we're already thinking about winter by January. Winter's not our hardest months. Coastal Taranaki, it's the dry summers and the autumns were a relatively mild winter. Our farm is just about 100% flat, free draining volcanic soils. But I guess some of the bigger changes came, we sort of used to follow a system that would, you know, 2200 cover on the 1st of June and following a feed wedge set by Dairy NZ. Now probably the last 3 years we've gone for more 2800, 3000 covers 1st of June. And then more so last year, like the last couple of years, we've been putting in a bit more diversity, but last year we sort of put in multi-species with about 20 different species to a third of the farm, and all of a sudden, you know, feeling like you're babying those paddocks, I suppose, a little bit more while you're grazing them. Coming into the winter, where we're leaving higher residuals and stuff in those paddocks. We did have quite a mild winter, but just seeing the response from those paddocks and that regrowth from leaving those higher residuals. And it's been a, I don't want to say a hard year to trial things, it's been an easy year to trial things, because it's been a hard year to trial things because things have been so easy. We haven't been put under any pressure in the last 12 months. We had a very wet November, but apart from that, we had a very mild winter, a very mild spring, and a really good summer, autumn. We've had good rainfall right through the summer and autumn. We've gone through March looking like the desert, and now at the end of March, we're sort of sitting on a 2700 cover and we haven't fed anything out yet. So as far as trying to trial things, it's probably not been the best. We haven't been put under pressure to trial things this year, but also some big changes just to our fertilizer management and stuff as well. Obviously we went from conventional fertilizers in 2015-16 with that change to the organics, but we're sort of into the chicken manures and not really knowing a lot about what we were using, whereas now we've moved more into the fish and seaweeds and humates and looking at the response to that alongside the pasture diversity and heading into the winter with higher covers. And the other thing, it's probably quite unique to us, even when we were conventional, we only do hay. So we make 100, 110 tonne of hay each year on farm. We don't do any silage. So although in saying that, we didn't come from we didn't use urea or anything before we were organic either. So you sort of talk pasture quality and stuff, and I knew Dairy NZ used to tell us that, you know, hay was crap and you've got 7 or 8 megajoules of ME in hay versus the 11 in silage, but our hay was sort of coming out the same quality as the average silage, and we went under that pressure when it's a bit wetter in October, November, trying to bale slush. So we only do hay, and in the past we've also done turnips through the autumn, but we haven't done that for about 3 years now, so we're actually, that was more for contouring. but we've tried to now just, I've done a bit of deferred grazing this autumn as well, but just trying to put that multi-species in that's going to help us through the different months of the year and push higher covers into the winter. We're not scared to dry our cows off to get them through the winter, and our young stock, like, I mean, they're our future. They eat as much as they like. They go over the scales every month. They're growing well.
So can I jump in there, because it was actually a question I had for Mark, and I don't pretend to have the experience to know this, but you do hear, I guess I hear anecdotes about, things like, not all hay is equal, and you mentioned there basically your hay being the same ME as your standard silage. So I guess, and I'm quite personally intrigued in that. So what's the secret to growing high ME hay?
I guess we cut our hay at the length that most people are cutting their silage, so we don't let it go to seed. So you're cutting the quality grass. The only difference is we're drying it out. And when you do a herbage test on it, it comes back an average around 10.1, 10.2. And you don't have to worry about one wraps or pit silage, but the costs are far outright.
Yeah, it does somewhat go to seed, but just not to that fully rank overgrown. But it's not full. It was never full of urea either. It was always, yeah. We haven't actually done any testing since we've put in the multi-species, so it'll be really interesting knowing that that's what our ME was coming back at.
No.
Yeah, earlier on.
You're right. And do you, by any chance, do you Brix test any of your pastures that are, have you done any tests on that prior to? No,
not prior, no. So we don't really have the comparisons there to go prior with Brix testing. The Brixometer used to be for testing colostrum milk. We didn't, it wasn't a thing for conventional farmers to be testing their pastures.
Yeah, I'm personally quite curious if there's a correlation between the two. The other question, in terms of, so your first winter on those multi-species, did you notice anything different from an animal performance nutrition perspective? Because nutrition was one of the questions that came up last time as well, around I guess the implications of shifting from particularly a lot of people shifting from winter crops to more grass-based systems, or multi-species winter crop systems as opposed to monocultures, for example. So any experiences there?
Yeah, I'm like, we've never had major animal health issues to come back from. Do you know, like, we've got a relatively healthy, we're a full Jersey herd. So we go through calving, like we calve Jersey on Jersey. So we don't, right through the winter and spring, we don't have major animal health issues. And we also had a very mild winter last year and a very mild spring. Like, we never went through any really major wet patches or anything to really be able to do a good comparison at this point.
Cool. That's good. I mean, just cover off part, there was asking Rachel and Kenneth on was kind of a deliberate thing to compare and contrast a South Otago long cold winter with a coastal Taranaki opposite one. So so there was some deliberate stuff. So maybe we'll have to get you back on for managing summers, and you can tell us how hard it is.
Yeah, a little bit harder.
Yeah, I suppose so. Just with the last couple of minutes, where would you like to be in a few years' time? Where are you heading? What do you think's the kind of what's the potential for your system, with a particular focus on getting through winters and
probably the biggest, and I talked about ongoing challenges and stuff. So we have two farms, as I mentioned before. One of the farms has got plenty of old boxwood hedges from my grandfather's day. That's where I grew up. Plenty of, like, my parents did all the riparian planting back in the 90s. They also put in riparian shelter belts between a lot of the paddocks. So there's a lot of shelter, whereas our place, we have those westerlies, those southwesterlies, the dry westerlies in the summer and those colder southwesterlies in the winter, coming straight off the Tasman Sea. And it's trying to grow trees, both as fodder and as shelter. And that's probably, our other farm is full season once a day, whereas we go once a day at Christmas at our place. But we do notice our cows on our other farm lose those winter coats probably 3 to 4 weeks earlier than ours. And a lot of that, it's just the shelter, but you can't grow a tree overnight. So that's probably one of our biggest things, is wanting to see that winter shelter coming up, and that real diversity in the pastures. And
yeah, that diverse pastures will help us out in the summer. So trying to grow that mixed species, they'll give you that crop all year round. So
yeah, and I mean, summer's probably, it's harder to grow grass in summer, but we don't really get above 25 degrees here, and we've got Jersey cows. So the heat stress in the summer is not the issue. It's that southwest, those winds, those winter winds, as far as the animals go, although the westerly winds in the summer as well, as far as drying the pastures out.
No doubt the hay policy in winter helps keep them warm as well. We just had one quick question before we move on to Dean from Julie, which is, well, I suppose the question, do you have any chicory in your hay? And if so, any issues with drying it before baling?
No, we actually don't, because we did like a third of the farm last year that did have, there was chicory in the multi-species there, and we did put more plantain and clovers and stuff. The way that our farm is set up, we live on a little road with 2 houses, and there's about 50 hectares of our farm across the other side of our little road. So we try to do a lot of our hay and keep our young stock sort of over there, and there hasn't actually been any chicory put into that side yet, but there is a plan. So maybe we need to look into that drying aspect before we jump in and put it in.
You do see it with the plantain and that, though, with the bigger leaf, that it does take probably that extra day to dry. So it's just being real that you do need that extra day.
Yeah, I know we held off putting some chicory in some 1 year pasture just for that reason, because I wasn't sure. Mark, have you got any experience with that, just while we're on that topic?
Am I there?
Yep.
No, to be honest, we were just buying in hay, whatever hay we could get, to be honest, but managed to get some really nice red clover hay. So that's going to go pretty well. I mean, we got the hay from the same person as last year, and we can see those clover areas growing. I've got big patches of red clover, just big round patches in the paddock. That's pretty cool to see. Up to 1/3 of a bale in weight can be seed, so that's quite an important thing for me, to bring that diversity into my pastures, like the timothy and other grasses. Yeah, so yeah, I like to go and look at it, look at the hay before it's cut down. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, if you've got broadleafs in there, that nutrient value and that value of NPK and other minerals is going to be a lot higher. So yeah, that your hay with the plantain will be fantastic. Yeah.
So on the flip side, maybe don't plant herbs if you're planning on cutting and selling hay, because you'll be selling a bit more food.
For sure. Yeah, exactly. No, sorry, I mean chicory. Yeah, but yeah, anything with those high nutrition plants, they'll have plenty of minerals. Yeah. I think that fertilizer, that fertility gets used up. But it's that extra water holding capacity that bale litter or mulching layer creates, where the soil health turns up, the worms turn up, and things just improve greatly. Yeah, that's the main one.
Sweet, thanks, Mark. We just got one more question for Rachel and Kenneth before we move on to Dean, and that's just can you just explain your basic wintering system? So I suppose that's in as few words as possible. What does winter on your farm look like in terms of feed and rotation and etc.?
Yeah, I suppose it's not too far. No, it's not too far different to the conventional. Because it's probably slightly. It's like, so we're a grass based, and we start like as we sort of head towards dry off. We're through the winter. We can be on 120 day round with hay. But I guess, yeah, the biggest change over those last couple of years is that they're going into a lot higher covers and stuff during the winter, and leaving more behind, leaving a bit more residual and stuff, especially last year. But yeah, we start organising planning for winter in January. So working out, like, we'll be the first people in the district to put our cows in the truck if we have to, if it's going really dry. And same with drying off, we'll dry off to look after animals through the winter because we don't buy and feed.
So that's probably sounds like a key part of your whole strategy there is just really early decision making to make sure you can get through that winter without, well, because you haven't got the options to import, you know what you've got to work with, so you got to make it.
And I guess even before, I mean there's organic feed and stuff that you're buying as well, but even before we were organic, we were always a self-contained system. So yeah, it is about really early decision making and giving extra cover and extra bales and in your hay barn is that insurance policy up your sleeve because there's no 0800 J swap.
Awesome, cool. And just one last question, which is probably a really quick one. Michael, just checking whether the multi-species you're planting are perennials or annuals. I assume they're perennials. Yeah,
we go for the perennials. And last year we went for sort of a more broad mix. This year we've gone for more, not so worried about our winters, more the deeper taproot sort of summer safe, adding some more summer safe sort of varieties in. But yeah, we've never really been into annuals. It's always been perennials.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks very much. We'll crack on to Dean, and no doubt there'll be some questions after that we'll bring you and Mark back in for. So Dean, for those that haven't met or heard Dean speak before, he's farming up the Napier Road. It's about 15 minutes north of Napier on some medium to steep hill country there. And I've known Dean for quite a few years, used to farm about 45 minutes and learnt a lot off him in my early days. So thanks very much for being here, Dean. Again, if in case anyone's joined, that Google Drive and the link has a bit more detail on Dean's system, etc. And yeah, again, just asked Dean to be on here just so we could have a bit more, I guess, diversity and a different perspective on a wintering system. So I'll let Dean talk to that. So Dean, if you want to, I'll unmute you or ask you to unmute if you can do that. That's it. It's looking good. Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind, just similar kind of talking us through what your winters used to look like and how that's changed over time and where you are now as a place to start.
Yeah, probably the biggest changes, we've had a few stocking policy changes over the last sort of 10 years. We've gone from dairy grazers. Well, we started off having winter cows on, and then we've gone dairy grazers. We had them for 10 years. Then we've gone into rearing our own calves and trying to sell them as younger cattle. So then we were just taking yearling cattle through the winter. And now with TB in the area, I'm going a bit more sheep heavy this season again. So I'm down to 50 cows and calf cows. what have I got? 40 odd yearlings and 77 2-year-old steers. So yeah, the reduction in cattle in the last few years is going to change my wintering pressure, especially if it gets really wet. It's a bit easier with the sheep. So when I was doing the dairy grazings, I was basically on a sort of a 50 to 60 day round, and I'd try and be saving up feed in that late autumn period, sort of from mid-March to April in a lot of my winter area. And then I basically mined it over sort of 3 or 4 rotations going through the winter. And by mid-August, I'd be speeding things up. So that, and it was always, I'd start off on 2 shifts a day, and then I'd end up on 3 or 4 shifts a day, getting into the early spring. So I did it with those. This year, with the increasing the sheep, I'll have, I've already got 8 hectares set aside for about 3 or 4 weeks already, where I'll put 40 2-year-old steers on. That'll be basically a relief valve if it gets wet, cold, or whatever, they can sort of go. I definitely want to get rid of them before midway through lambing to free up room for the sheep. So that'll basically be, 5 of them on a hectare going around, probably doing similar sort of rounds, probably a 40 odd 45 day round or something like that, 2 or 3 times, and hopefully they're gone. And the rest of the cattle will all be in the yearlings, and the other 2-year-old steers will go in with the cows. I intend to start them with the ewes, so they'll be rotating around with the ewes for a start. Keeping an eye on, hopefully, through those paddocks that they're not taking out too much of the rougher pasture on the faces that I want later on for the cattle, especially. The big thing I find is when we have wet, cold weather is making sure there's enough roughage to keep the animals rooming full. And the roughage also generates a lot of heat in the rumen. So if they're on lush green grass, they'll get cold and pace and poke paddocks up, where if you've got nice, good roughage to feed them, and we usually have plenty of that on sort of northerly faces of the country with poorer grasses. That goes a big way to keeping the animals content and not pacing and poking up paddocks.
Awesome. And I remember you saying a couple of years ago that your summers used to be your hardest season and your winters were the easiest, and now it's the other way around. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, over the years, with improving my infiltration, so on a lot of the dry faces, they're now taking a lot more moisture, and then it all ends up coming back out, seeping out the bottom of all my hills. So my sort of from halfway down a hillside to the bottom, the flat, if there's a flat at the bottom, I'll have water oozing out. So I've got all these areas that have actually got wetter as my infiltration's improved higher up on the ridges, and the ridges dry out nice and quick. But so I've sort of created increased problem areas that I've got to be careful with bugging, and they'll stay wet for longer.
Right. Yeah. Looking at a couple of photos of your place back in the day, with we used to winter down on those flats above the gullies versus you basically don't touch them with cattle now.
Yeah.
Good testament to your infiltration rates, that one. And a couple more questions. What are your thoughts on? I guess there's a few different grazing theories going around in terms of having one big long round and kind of having a pretty hard severe graze and a long recovery, versus you're talking about sort of 3 to 4 rounds over that 120 day winter period. So I guess, why do you do that from a pasture, soil, animal performance perspective?
Yeah, with us, the big thing I found, it gives me options. I can move them fast if it does get really wet. We don't know when we're going to get a big easterly here and get 250 mils in a couple of days, and that sort of, you have to be able to be flexible to change your grazing with that. And I find those longer rounds, they're sort of a bit inflexible. You have to have the animals at that high density for extended periods of time, where by moving them quicker and just sort of mining it over a few rounds, it gives me a bit more flexibility. I can just move on, leave a bit extra there, and then catch up on the next round in that area. And yeah, just push them on to somewhere where it's a bit drier and then come back to places as well. So I just found it had a bit more flexibility for me than just going around on a long round, taking it down. So that extra cover helps, protect the soil a bit as well. And even when I was doing that, if you did get a big wet event, I'd have a lot of time the neighbours would go past and they'd think I'd had pugged the paddock a bit, it'd get a bit dirty and stuff, and then they'd all be annoyed that it had regrown within 30 days. It was, it looked a lush green grass again, but that's because it just had that bit extra cover. And it was superficial damage. It was just pushing it into the thing, into the ground, rather than a severe pugging event, and they'd just stand up and regrow again, sort of thing.
Awesome, thanks for that. And the other strategy that I know that you used to employ, I don't know if you've done it recently, is effectively some autumn pasture cropping. You used to drill an oats and a few other perennials species and stuff in autumn and obviously graze it off through winter. Now, was that ever a strategy mostly about increasing your amount of winter feed, or was that just an opportunity to get a bit more diversity into your pastures?
It's a bit of both. It's good for getting winter feed in coming out of a dry season. So I haven't done any of that this year. We've had some rain over the summer, but we've just had big gaps between their rainfalls. Was basically going. We had some rain early January, then nothing for a month, then some rain February, and then another bit in March, 20 mils in March. So it hasn't really got dry enough that I've thought to do it this year, but last year I certainly did quite a bit. I did 10 hectares or something, maybe a little bit more. And that's a good way, just putting the barley in and the oats and some Italian ryegrasses just gives you something that's a bit more winter active when it is cooler coming out of a dry spell. But I find I've got to have those perennial grasses set back enough so it actually needs to turn properly dry and brown to give them a good chance to drill them in and be competitive. Where this year with the grasses stayed kind of greenish through. So if I drilled it and we did get a bit of rain, my other grasses would outcompete. So it's a good strategy on those for us coming out of a dry season, a drought sort of type scenario. Get it in while it's still dry when there's rain forecast, and then it competes well with the pasture species that have been set back in a dry spell, and then gives you a good amount of feed over the winter.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we did have a bit of a discussion about that on the last webinar, and because there's a few, you obviously have to get your timing and your grazing pretty right to have success with that. And I remember, I think it was Maya on that pumice country up near Rotorua. I think he said he almost basically drills half the farm every autumn on those light pumicey soils and gets just drills straight in and gets a really good strike there. Whereas perhaps people on heavier country have to be a bit more particular about their timing. Awesome, thanks for that, Dean. Yeah, I think maybe we'll open it up for a broader Q&A. We've got a couple more questions coming in, and we'll stick with one that's coming from Michael Riley from Dean. And please, if you got more questions, keep typing them in. Dean, do you have a long-term plan to help deal with the wet flats, or is that just a good thing going into summer?
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't think I can really do anything about it because I'd rather have the infiltration up on the ridges. It's just on this Papa country, like a lot of the East Coast, you got that impermeable layer down deeper, so you're soaking so much water, then it's got nowhere to go down through the soil profile. It can only go so far, and then it comes out. So all along the sides of our gorges, there's just the seep at that layer of the papa level where it comes out. Any extra moisture in the soil profile always comes out there over long periods of time. Yeah, so it's just a matter of managing them a bit different. Being careful with the cattle that you don't take them too low over the winter. The sheep are mostly fine, but when it gets wet, when you have these big easterly events, you can make quite a mess with sheep too if you got them at too high densities and in the wrong place. So, but we are lucky with our contour, as you've seen, our contour is all over the place. So even though we're a wet flat here, there's always a dry northerly face close by to put stock onto. It's not my contour is very mixed.
Yeah, and actually, so on that note, are you selectively deferring or increasing covers on your northerly faces to get you through winters with that roughage, or does that kind of just come as a result of the poorer quality species and your stock not wanting to graze them anyway, so you just end up with a bit more?
Yeah, on the real lower fertility bits, yeah, they selectively don't graze it over that summer period once it goes to seed. But in a lot of the areas, the quality's improved over time. So I don't have a lot of rat's tail left on these faces. Where when I first started with the dairy grazing and stuff, I'd still had a lot of rat's tail and those sort of species. And I'm finding now I'm getting a lot more cocksfoots and those sorts of type things coming away. And some of the cocksfoots are actually quite winter active, so I'm getting a fair bit of growth with those sort of, you get a regrowth of that green stuff underneath it as well. So yeah, it's just a mix of the two. And the northerly faces grow better than the rest of the farm over that winter period because they're exposed to the sun and they're sheltered from the cooler southerly winds and everything. So yeah, I find by going around, is 2 or 3 times, you're getting that good fresh pick coming back again and just slowly mining into the rougher places as well, the roughage.
Brilliant, thanks for that. We've got a couple more questions that have just popped through for you, so maybe we'll keep going. One from Dylan on asking, what's your altitude and your typical soil and air temperatures during winter? And how do your infiltrated slopes, I guess that's well infiltrated slopes, perform over dry summers?
Okay, so the altitude, we basically 40 meters to 280 meters. But there's not much at 40 meters. It's just down the bottoms of the gorge running up through the middle of the property. What was the other one? The soil temperature. Oh yeah, the soil temperature varies. A few years ago, I did a talk down Southland, so I stuck my soil thermometer down in the bottom of the gorges, and it was reading -2. So I could go down to Southland and say, so that's what my soil temperature was. But for most of the farm, it's a lot better than that. We'd sort of be in that 8 to 10 sort of type thing, certainly on the northerly faces. The worst thing we have is those wet areas. When they get really wet, it really holds the growth back. And find properties up the road on drier pumice country will actually start growing in the spring, sometimes earlier than I will, just because they've got good free drainage, and the heavier soils just take that much longer to actually warm up a bit and get the biology going again from the excess moisture in the winter.
So that actually leads on nicely to the second part of that question, which is how do you've got much better infiltration now, so how does that affect your performance over dry summers?
It's improving it, I hope. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the summers generally have been easier. That was always our hardest part. We just changing management in the summer. Like I do over the summer, I'm doing a lot longer rounds, and in the winter, the summer times when I'm doing my 80 to 100 day round sort of thing to get through when it is really dry, to get through that summer period. So that's sort of the way we, instead of the winter people doing those sort of long rounds, we're doing that in their summers. So that makes a big difference, getting through the summer, just giving everything that extra time. And on those oily faces, that with a better infiltration, we carry on growing a bit more feed into summer, helps get more covers in there. So I'm actually finding that from when I started the dairy grazing, I can probably graze these paddocks for another 3 or 4 weeks going into the summer before I need to get off them to be able to stockpile up enough feed to get through to keep covers on there over that summer period.
You're right, and yeah, that 3 or 4 week can be the difference between having enough and not. Okay, the last question there, Dean, from Ross for now at least. Do you run your cattle and sheep in the same mob over winter?
Yep. When I was doing the dairy grazing, I never did. Just never figured it was a good look for the dairy grazers come down and see their cattle in with your sheep. But now it's my own cattle. Yeah, well, I'll probably start my cattle in with the ewes for a start, and then as ewes get closer to lambing and they got high nutritional requirements, they'll be going out on some better paddocks, and the cows and the other cattle will be onto some rough areas, cleaning up the last of the roughage there. And then the ewes will go back to those paddocks once they've lambed and form part of a spring rotation on there. My cows aren't calving till October, so their nutritional demand's not till well into the spring. So they can, do a bit of work in that sort of August period when my ewes are lambing, and they can be on some rough paddocks that I don't want to lamb ewes on. I can lamb my ewes on the better country and then do a bit of a swap. Once the ewes are lambed, they can go onto that country where the cows have been in that late part of the winter, and the cows can come onto some of the better country as they're about to calve.
Brilliant. Awesome. No, thanks very much for that. Mark and Rachel and Kenneth, feel free to, if you've got questions of each other, feel free to jump in there too. Otherwise, I'll keep chipping away. There was a question here, Rachel and Kenneth, from Bryce from a wee while back. How do you establish your diverse pasture mixes being organic?
I guess there's been a bit of trial and error, really, but everything goes into existing pastures. When we were using chicken manure, we were chucking seed in with the autumn chicken manure. We've got a seed drill, so we've done some drilling, we've done broadcasting. We've actually got a town fert now, and we haven't trialled it yet, but we've had some good success rates out of putting small seeds in with the town fert as well. Some species like plantain will survive whatever you do, and you'll see it appear. Others, I think it's a matter of don't stress. There's stuff that's gone through the seed drill and we've gone, oh crap, we wasted some money on that, and then it sort of appears when the time's right.
Yes, so it can come up sort of 6 months later.
Plus, I think it's probably through changing, like just the natural changes in soil and stuff. We've seen other stuff reappear that we didn't plant, like the yarrow and stuff that's coming back through. Yeah, does that answer your question, or is that?
Yeah, no, I think so. So no cultivation. It's all just direct. Sort of oversowing or undersowing or whichever.
Yeah, probably the biggest mistake that we made was when I ordered a seed mix and just went, no, keep it simple, and chucked it all into one mix instead of separating the large seed from the small seed, which we've got the boxes on the drill that we could have put them in separate.
I've got 2 boxes, so I could have put the big seed in one box and the smaller seed in the other and changed the 2 depths, but
that's probably,
you live and learn.
Been a learning, and don't go too hard on the plantain. Don't need to add any more of that in. But there's been a bit of a range of different ways.
Cool. Oh no, thanks for that. So one of the key takeaways there is be patient with what comes through. Mark, you were nodding there. Is that something you've experienced as well with the things you've been trialling?
Yeah, a farm I visited in the North Island a couple of weeks ago, they were aerating their paddock with a little bit of cut after a reasonably hard grazing, and they had harrows behind the aerator, and they must have had a wee spinner on the aerator to scatter seed, and that was how they were sowing in an organic model. But no, just with the change of our grazing, really, we've like a pasture paddock that we planted in 2017 with maybe 8 species. The botanists were there last year and they counted 30 species in there now. So there is species diversity volunteering back with just longer recoveries, I think. So that's pretty cool, yeah. So we might even park the drill up next year and just not do anything.
You're right.
Actually, sorry, I'll just add in one other thing that we've done this year was that we did it was one of the paddocks that we put multi-species in last year and then deferred grazed it over the summer, and it was only 4.5 hectares, but we're looking at potentially maybe doing a couple less paddocks for hay next year and a couple more deferred grazing paddocks, but it's more autumn. That's more autumn than winter, but we've just found those multi-species to really well establish in those paddocks.
Thank you. Mark, just going back to a couple of the questions that you answered just in the Q&A there, but thought we might just share those with everyone in case they haven't seen them. There was one around from Will around getting rid of thistles with bale grazing. Would you like to speak to that if you wouldn't mind? Would you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, repeat it if you like.
It was from Will. Have you tried getting rid of thistles with bale grazing? And if so, what have been the results?
When I do see some thistles, I like to sit the bales on them. But I think there's probably thistles coming in with the bales too, but I think there's more of a summertime grazing issue, like if the thistles are coming up. So if the thistles are volunteering back, maybe recovery periods long enough, there's not enough ground cover there. And then if you get that stock density up, I've heard of other farmers, another farmer in Kuria whose farm was just covered in thistles, and he moved to more density, and those thistles disappeared after say 2 or 3 years. So it sounded quite bad how many thistles they did have, and they just disappeared over time with the grazing management. So yeah, we don't really have many weeds now, or thistles. Yeah.
Okay. And I suppose on that note, are you concerned about weeds coming in your hay, or if someone let's say if I'm going to go and have a look at buying a couple hundred bales for this winter, should I be concerned about weeds in my hay bales, or would you say if you're getting your grazing right, don't worry about it?
Probably only 2 weeds I'd be worried about here would be barley grass and maybe ragwort. But no, most of those weeds have a higher mineral value. So if there's feed value in them, then I think that's great. If they're docks and whatever, then that shouldn't really be an issue. We just don't see those weeds as an issue volunteering back with the way we're changing our grazing, I think. Yeah, that's what I put it down to anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, we had one of the topics we were thinking we might cover a bit is around managing nutrition. I think it was more around mineral nutrition through winter. So from a, I guess an all grass system, you tend to keep that balance up. But Mark, have you got any thing you're supplementing specifically through that winter period when you're bale grazing, or do you find that the hay and the grass, the hay and the pasture's got what your cows are needing?
Yeah, no, everything seems to be staying really well. I mean, we're still adding a few minerals through our water system, and a little bit of mag, but come springtime calving, we're just seeing a lot less metabolics. I think we had 3 or 4 downer cows out of 750 this year, like true downer cows when they come to pasture and in the colostrum mod. So those numbers are reducing greatly. Yeah, there's a few other things. We're not using bloat oil anymore, I think, and we're seeing the best clover we've ever seen. I think it's just they're getting shifted more regularly, and the pastures are slightly taller, so they're getting maybe there's better mineral composition in those plants. So no, we'll keep monitoring that and adjusting those minerals that we are administering through the dosage on, through the water. But other than that, we're not doing like salt licks or anything like that. Yeah, just the hay and grass.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that. I've got one last question here, and then we'll probably wrap up unless any more pop through. And it's a bit of an overarching one to Rachel and Kenneth, which is just around what's happened with your production since you've started your Regen journey.
It's probably not a very good season to gauge it on because we've had such an exceptional mild winter and spring this season, and then we've had good rainfall through January, February, March. So yeah, I don't want to be too quick to say that things are great because we haven't been put under the pressure of having what is a typical dry coastal Taranaki autumn, late summer, autumn this year. But hopefully we've started putting in that diversity and getting out to longer round lengths in late summer. That will see us into the future.
Cool.
Yeah, very hard year to actually, it's pretty easy farming in coastal Taranaki this season, so it's quite a hard year to gauge it off.
Yeah. And I think we were talking about before we went live that you're a DRNZ case study farm, so that kind of data over time, does that kind of get updated every year on through the DRNZ stuff? So you're tracking a few things in that regard?
Yeah, and we've been a case study for about 5 years now, so yeah, cool. It gets updated every 6 months.
Awesome. Yeah, I get quite jealous of dairy farmers who have all this, this wealth of data that just gets automated and pumped out pretty much every year, and milk ureas and all that kind of stuff, compared to the us sheep and beef farmers who have to actually get our cattle in and weigh them to get anything quantified. But on the flip side, I think we learn a heap from the fact that you do get that kind of detailed data coming through, which is awesome. All right, well, unless anyone has any last questions or you've got questions of each other, I think we'll be wrapping up there.
Sounds like the Taranaki is a pretty damn good place to farm. How do you manage your cell count and your mastitis and stuff in the organic system? You said your herd health's really good. So has it been pretty easy or challenging?
I think you go into a lot more sort of preventative mode, and I mean, cell count's one thing that you mentioned. Like, you go and have your cow sort of stray voltage tested and all that sort of, you sort of go reasonably heavy on culling, I think, probably in those first couple of years. Lucky to have sort of lower empty rates and stuff that we have that culling capacity. And saying that, like some of the stuff, like we've actually just watched our animal health just get better and better over time, and there's a lot of sort of stigma around once a day farming and stuff. We've got our little farm, 190 cows, it's been once a day for 5 seasons now. We're in the autumn, the cell count's sitting at 100. Like it's not, yeah, like there's no major cell count issues or anything. But yeah, I think you just go into that preventative sort of mode, and there's plenty of organic remedies and stuff on the market that there didn't used to be. There's quite a few organic farms in coastal Taranaki that converted about 20 years ago. And there used to sort of be a saying every organic farm needed a conventional farm down the road that they could send an animal to if it needed a good dose of antibiotics. But that's not the case anymore. There's sort of enough organic remedies and stuff on the market. Yeah.
Cool. I'll just wrap it up then and say thanks very much, Mark, Dean, Rachel and Kenneth for being on here and sharing. I think Rachel and Kenneth, this was the first webinar you've done, so much appreciated, and far more awkward than being out in the paddock with a spade and gumboots. So perhaps, well, I'm looking forward to some point being able to bring my gumboots and a spade up to your place and potentially look at leasing a farm up your way rather than down here, because it sounds like I'm pretty sure that there might be a bit more demand in the market after this evening.
Not every season's like this. And we pay top dollar for our land too. So yeah,
good point. That's well out of my price range. Cool. Yeah, so just to wrap up, this, if anyone wants to listen back to any of this, we will have it up on the website and that in a few days' time. And as per last time, just really keen to try and improve these webinars and make them more valuable to people as we go. So if you've got any ideas for topics next time, ways we can change the formats, people that you want to hear from, etc., please email me is probably the best, or for those of you on the WhatsApp group, just flick me a message. And really keen to sort of have everybody helping drive where these head and making sure they're valuable to everyone. So thanks, Dean, Rachel, Kenneth and Mark.